Hello, everyone. Welcome to Psychic Kitchen Podcast. We have Ashala with eyeoftheworld.ca if you're looking for appointments. How's everyone doing today?
Yeah, very good. Thank you. How are you, Charlotte?
I'm hanging in there and really happy to be here with both of you. Yeah.
Yes, you said you were feeling a bit frazzled before we came on.
Little frazzled. Yeah.
Lots of lots of things going on. I think most
Lots
people
of things going on, lots of integration, lots of, potentials for evolving. And just before we came on, Thomas asked that great question about, have you noticed this effect of maybe it's about instant gratification, but where people are seeming to expect a lot of dramatic growth and results in a very short period of time, go from level 1 to level 10 super fast. And I think that's something very interesting to contemplate at this time, because I certainly notice that there seems to be a very rapid spin on life, and it's sometimes hard to separate oneself from that.
How have you found, hey Tina, how have you found your own personal sort of growth? Is it been, where things, did they go, did you change rapidly in some points, or has it just been slow overall rather than a fast one?
I would say it goes in phases, and often when I think that nothing's happening.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
I liken it to, I've been a dancer, professional dancer for years, and taught dance for a lot of years. And there's a phenomena when we're working with learning something in the body where you can learn, you can expose yourself to learning something technically and struggle. And then people seem to believe that if you've got to come back and practice every day, and then you'll eventually get good at it. But I actually have witnessed with people working in the body, learning things, that you introduce it pretty thoroughly, and then you just leave it for weeks, maybe even months. And then all of a sudden you come back and the person can do it like effortlessly. It's almost as though the psyche, the energy, body, mind, spirit has heard the call, like, we want to do this and we want to move this way. And it's taken time for that message to go all the way intercellularly through all the bodies. When it's complete, it just pops into reality. It's like done.
Really? Well, that's pretty interesting.
Well, a couple of years ago, when I first started healing, God, I don't know how old I was. But it was just like, it was a Christmas Eve, and I was like, I have to heal people. And so I was like, who do I know that's psychic? Because I don't know if it's going to work. Even though I was attuned to like Reiki 1 and some other stuff. And I just went and found people. Like I found one of my old friends that's a psychic. Then I went to my ex-girlfriend who had a jaw condition. The first person was like, I'm seeing pyramids and Merkabas. The second person had a jaw disorder. So she messaged me the next day. She was, at that time, she was agnostic atheist. So I was like, it's going to work on anyone. It's her and my thinking back then. And the next day she messaged me. She's like, 50% of the pain's gone. But I just did it. But it's like, I have to see if this works. I need evidence. So I just kept going, and kept going. And I think that's the key, is a lot of people are afraid to put themselves out there and to actually see what happens. And then people are going to judge them based upon, I think they're afraid just people are going to judge them in general. But in my mind, I'm like, people are going to judge you anyways. So why are you so concerned?
And that's the fear of failure.
Good or bad.
Yeah. The fear of failure is a big one. Especially, I used to practice psychic ability with a friend, and they were afraid of getting things wrong, and whereas I didn't. I thought we were trying to guess what the other one was thinking, or what the playing cards, or what have you.
Mhm.
And I didn't care if I got it wrong, because I just thought, well, you can't. I mean, the only way you're going to get it right is by getting it wrong a few times, sense. Because then you're learning which energies or which feeling to trust or what have you. And if you're afraid of getting it wrong, then you'll probably get it wrong anyway, because that's sort of the energy you're giving out. So I think it's okay to I mean, we naturally sort of do fear, obviously, certain times, and it's learning to live in that and overcome it, because yeah, it's interesting.
It's interesting. Thanks for that reflection, Jimmy. And it makes me think about, well, yeah, people are afraid to get it wrong. I feel like in my observation working with intuitive development with people, they're also afraid to get it right, because there's something that happens when they get it right, where it opens up the extraordinary, the phenomena of extraordinary. And if the box labeled extraordinary gets opened, there's a lot in there that opens up, right? It's like
it's not Pandora's box, so
not exactly, but it is definitely like
it feels like it sometimes. Yeah.
It means if you believe in extraordinary, it also means you might need to reconsider your beliefs around all these limited aspects of life that you've got yourself pretty strictly bound in. So I get people often are a mixture of excitement, like, wow, I just did something extraordinary happened. But then they're also like, well, what do I do with that? Like, what do I do now that I feel I could tap into something? It's going to start to open up a lot of questions and inquiry in their lives. And that can be scary, I think, for people.
Yeah, it's just like changing your whole belief system. The old one fights for all it can to hang on to it. And it's I guess the main one, I guess, well, one of the main ones is going from trusting sort of pharmaceuticals and stuff like that to going natural. I find there's a big hold. I've experienced that with people that I know who are unwilling to give natural medicine a go. They're clinging on to the pharmaceutical aspect. Because it's all they've ever known. And you think, well, yeah, I was there at one point. We've all been there, well, most of us. So having to let something that
one thing
go.
One thing I've been getting, which I got probably 10, 11 months ago, and I keep seeing it. My guides are like, we want you in public healing people. That doesn't mean like in a controlled environment, because that's not how I work. I think Jimmy knows that from saying me all these years. Like literally on the street, like we want you like in different locations in Atlanta, like healing people. There's places you can go where they're not going to do anything as long as people sign waivers. Like you can literally put yourself on the belt line. And it's something I had an idea about before, and it came up again through another psychic that I talked to. They're like, why am I seeing you like doing this in front of like hundreds of people? And I'm like, I don't know. But I was like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. As soon as it came back up, I was like, okay, this makes sense.
Well, there's certainly no shortage of need out there, Thomas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think too many people want to put themselves in boxes, like, and it's no offense to them. It's just it's safe, and sometimes for me, I like to break out of the safe box, if that makes sense.
Tara says, "Do it, Thomas. We as a whole need it." So, and I've got a question from Michelle. Hey, Michelle.
Hi,
I'll put it on the screen so you can read it.
Oh, people are wanting to get their abilities quickly, that they sometimes take a turn and then they start to spin out of control. Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. So I liken that to, I always see that the real gift is that of humility and of, just as Thomas is saying, what are your reasons for getting involved in this? And so I feel like people who are on a kind of a fast track, like, I want more of this, I want more of this. They often say, real great masters in anything are usually the ones that are going, no, please don't choose me. Right? And so if you're going, give me more, I want to grow as fast as I can, I'm super keen. It can be coming from a place where you're trying to gain something ego-wise, like either, a level of advantage, a level of power over something. Usually it's just something you're afraid of, right? In yourself. Like maybe it's poverty, or it's insignificance, or it's, I've got special abilities and I have to prove to people that I have them, or something like that, right? Usually I think it's just they're afraid of something. So they're trying to quickly gain the upper hand. But the real magic of working alchemically with intuition and healing, as Thomas is saying, is that it is the opposite of that. It's the most humble, I don't know anything, I'm here to be of service, and I will just do with what I'm given in a very understated way, almost like the opposite of trying to, right? Yeah. So
I think people need to figure out their why. They need to figure out their why. This is something my friend kept saying. Like, I've heard all these things you want to do, but I've yet to hear you say exactly what you want to do or why.
Ooh.
And I was like, okay, well, there needs to be a why. Then I have to figure out what that why is. Like, what does that have to do with humanity? So, and I even realized in that reading that I had that I was like, because it came to me, I was like, in all these past lifetimes, I battled this exact same thing over and over again. And they were like, yeah. Like questioning if I'd take this to another level. Like, what's the backlash?
It's like the I think everyone should have a the caterpillar from Alice in Wonderland, the Alice in Wonderland cartoon, and he keeps up. Alice says something and he says why, and then she says something else and he says why. I think everyone should have one of them over on their shoulders whenever they're doing something, and he just takes some of his hooker and ask why, and then sort of because then you're forced to sort of question yourself and why you are actually doing something instead of doing something just because it's always been done or someone's told you to do it or what have you. You're actually interrogating yourself and get to the core, or trying to get to the core of why you're actually acting the way that we are. So, but yeah.
Well, interesting you use the word interrogating, because I actually got that you are interrupting the unconscious part. That just goes ahead and does something like, it's like, I don't know. I'm just compelled to do this. I don't know. It seems to mean a lot to me for some reason. That's the unconscious drive, right? But when we interrupt that, like, wait a minute. Okay, you seem to have a lot of feeling around this. Maybe you want to get curious and go a little deeper. So I'm hearing interrupting instead of interrogating, because then we have a chance to learn something. As Thomas is saying, if you know your why, then it aligns you with your personal, I want to say your personal uniqueness in what your work is going to be. Like, it's not a one size fits all. That I would say I definitely have people where they, they're learning something and they're like, why can't I do, clairaudience? Like, I've learned all this, I can do all this stuff, but I can't do that. And I'm like, well, I mean, you might get curious and practice a bit more, and that might be interesting. But meanwhile, you've got all these amazing gifts. And if you say, well, that's not enough, I need to have all of them. Right? It's like,
there's always wanting more sort of thing.
Why do you need to have all of them? Like, and that gets into rushing, I think, as Thomas was saying earlier, about hurrying up to get like the gold star. I'm the super psychic. I have all the gifts or something. Like,
and we've had guests. Sorry, go on, brother.
Go ahead, brother.
I was just going to say.
I just think. Go ahead.
I'll just say we've had guests on here that have their gifts have seemingly opened up when they've been in states of turmoil and they've been on their on their last leg, so to speak. And I find that that's a big trigger for gifts opening up, is when we're in the depths of despair. But sorry, go on, Thomas.
I think it's basically the same thing. It's just people have to realize that it's like when you have, and I listen to these thought leaders all the time, Tony Robbins, just all kinds of different people. And they're like, as soon as you get the idea, act. Like, don't think about it. Figure out how you're going to do it. This is kind of how my mind works. Whether it's going live on TikTok to however many people or whatever, as soon as I get the idea, it might take me like 10 minutes, but then I'm just like, yeah, I'll do it now. Even if it's like last second. Sometimes I plan it, obviously, but I'm just like, even with what I talked about earlier, I'm like 2 weeks. I'm doing it in 2 weeks. Like, I'll figure it out. Yeah.
And then
there's no more waiting on this.
I wonder whether if you were to sit down and instead of just acting on it, acting off that instinct, shall we say, and asked why, whether we would talk ourselves out of doing it, because I think when we do question stuff, that we do kind of tend to talk ourselves out of doing it sometimes. Because we look at all the obstacles and the reasons not to do it instead of the reasons to do it. So maybe it's not the fact that we question it, it's we look at the wrong side of things. Yes, we can look at take precautions in some respects, but not made that the focus of the question.
And I think that's key too, because like, if I had done this 11 months ago and I didn't listen to what everyone else told me it wouldn't work and just listen to myself, I would have already had it done. They're showing me like going to different states already, if that makes sense. They just like, just go. They're like, just do it. Don't think, act, react, go. Like, I think people like are afraid like people are going to ridicule them or they're going to get beat up or something. I'm not so concerned about that as a big guy, but I think that's the only way you're going to make people see reality for what it is. Like, you almost have to shove it in their face sometimes. It's like the only way they're going to see it. It's like to break a mental paradox. I'm channeling. To break a mental paradox, you have to be willing to do something that will break the mental paradox.
Oh yeah.
How do you act? Do you act on instinct, Charlotte, or is it sort of very methodical, very sort of cerebral, or is it just mainly on instinct?
Well, what comes to mind when you ask this question is that in the realm of intuition, I respond very, very immediately. And that, I think, like when Thomas is saying, you don't give yourself time to start questioning, that is something that I really work with my students on. Like, your first thought, your first feeling, your first intuition. People will often go, oh no, hold on, I got to think about it. I got to pull back and analyze all this and decide if I think that's a valid imaginary thought. Well, when we're communicating with spirit, it is kind of like a process of being downloaded with imagery, with symbols, with concepts, with values, with stories, and there's no better way to stop that natural divine process of communication with spirit, with the creator, than to start questioning. As soon as you start going like, oh, I don't know, I doubt that, I maybe I need to reanalyze this, I want to make sure I get it right, like Thomas is saying, you know, like, oh, heaven forbid I'll make a mistake or whatever. It's like the innocent, natural, more naive part of us is where we actually do the most phenomenal channeling from. So, but that's where you're, again, it's not about ego. So I always say, I think I probably said this on my last interview with you guys, that I always encourage my students, you know, don't think of yourself as a great psychic, a great intuitive. Oh, I've got all these skills. I'm really knowledgeable and powerful. Think of yourself as, you know, you really know why you're doing this, and you're coming at it with such integrity. So your goal is to provide healing, to provide service. And it's not about, you know, I know the right answer. It's that I'll get out of the way and let spirit come through and bring some things to consider with curiosity. So there's no right or wrong, absolute this or that. It's really more about opening up the imagination to different possibilities. So when I am acting in my own life, it seems like I do better when I do that, diving in without thinking too much, than when I overplan.
Okay. Yeah, it makes sense. I think that's probably, yeah. Does it depend on whether how much emotion is attached, or do you just try and take emotion out of it, or do you make decisions based on emotion as well?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, that's a great method of dowsing or divining, letting spirit help you choose where the real value is. You know, I'm going through this conundrum right now. If you let me just share. Well, because I've got these courses. I've taught, of course, Tarot Level 1 for 25 years. I've been working on developing an online pre-recorded version of it so that I can carry on and do some other projects. And it seems to be like stuck on pause. And so I try to analyze and get things happening. But the truth is, my heart is somewhere else. Like, my heart is in these other projects that feel more relevant right now. So even though I'm telling myself, you know, you really should get this done,
complete it, sort of thing,
the emotion is not with that choice.
Right.
The emotion is over here. And it really is a cross purposes thing. And I think we've grown up in a system where you make decisions logically, and then you maybe consider the heart as a secondary influence. Going into a time and a new paradigm where we operate more instinctually with our hearts and choose, even if it doesn't make rational sense.
That will do at some point, sort of thing. I know what you mean. It makes sense. And there are times when you do something, well, I can only speak for myself, but where I've done something, I don't know why I'm doing this, but I'm doing it, and then maybe a week or a day or however long later, I think, oh, that's why I've done that, sort of thing. But you didn't know that at the time, but you just trusted that was what you needed to do, sort of thing. So there's a lot of trust involved. I've got another question for Michelle. Michelle says, do any of you or anyone you know experience the words spiritual psychosis? Or what is your thoughts on the words spiritual psychosis?
Let me jump into this, if you guys don't mind.
Yeah.
Um, how do I navigate this? They're like, fuck thinking. Okay. A lot of people seem to be going into this kind of psychotic state. I've noticed. People I know, some people I'm friends with, other things. And I don't know if that's being triggered by certain things. Like, what do you guys think about that?
What's triggering psychosis?
Yeah, like I just noticed some psychics, like they're kind of losing it. Not all of them, but some of them.
Well, I believe we have a lot of what I would call hungry ghosts at this juncture in our evolution.
Oh, okay.
And so the hungry ghosts, I think it's going to be a pretty phenomenal journey of healing and discovery for us in the years ahead, decades, maybe even centuries to come, working with that energy of almost like integrating all the shadow material that we've gone through in the last several thousand years. So there's a lot of trauma and there's a lot of ghost energy. And so it is when you open yourself up on a spiritual dimension, if you haven't really grounded through all your bodies, like, which is all the dimensions, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5D, and so on, being in good relationship with your physical body. Like if you're just in denial of that and trying to go out into the ethers and connect with extraterrestrials and, like you're basically, that is a fracture, and then you're open to that ghost energy. I feel, it's like, it seems like it's going to be very, very important for us to honor our whole selves going forward and stay balanced. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it makes
I would
sense.
see that a lot in Savannah, Georgia. Savannah, Georgia is like one of the most. I lived there for a year and a half. It's one of the most haunted places I ever saw, and I actually saw an acupuncturist there that worked with divergent channels. Everything from her knowledge was like, she's also an exorcist. But she would always be bringing up hungry ghosts. Now, what I would see in Savannah sometimes, especially if I went downtown, because it's extremely haunted. Like, I remember one time I went to a vape shop, and there was someone there, and like, we haven't smoked in 20 years, but we need to smoke. And I'm like, let me look at it. I was like, there's a ghost on them. And I'm like, guys, do you want me to do anything about this? They're like, no, just go about your business. But I don't think people realize that ghosts can do that. It's not something I teach because it scares people. But they can jump on you and try to feel something.
I think I've mentioned this guy's name in previous episode, but a few weeks ago I watched some interviews done a while ago. I think they were with a guy called Jerry Marzinski, and he talks about paranoid schizophrenia and how he worked. It was basically his whole life. He was a psychologist, and he worked with people who heard voices, basically. And that, I think I said at the time, that could be considered clairaudience, in the spiritual thing. And yeah, because Thomas, you said that they might not be happy for me to make that comparison, but that he basically explains them as being, I guess, hungry. Yeah, like you said, the hungry ghost is a sort of, because they want the energy, they want to live, they want the host's energy, they want to be able to experience things through the host that they're sort of attaching to, and people can't necessarily differentiate between what their own thoughts are and the thoughts of what their attachments are. But I guess in some respects, if we are source, and source is everywhere and we are everything, then we're just attaching to ourselves. In the sense, it's just an aspect of ourselves. I've heard said, and I kind of subscribe somewhat to the fact that our guides are just us, but in a different form. And so it could be, you could say that we're just sort of, it's just us, but it's just we're experiencing ourselves from a different part, from a different aspect to serve a purpose, for whatever is needed at the time. So, or something like that. But
Yeah. Well, a fractured part of us, right? A part that is lost and roaming aimlessly and hungry for connection, hungry for like. So we just, I feel we've had, you know, I'm really interested in the yugas. I don't know if you're familiar with that concept, but it's the Kali Yuga cycles, or sorry, the yuga, the Vedic cycles of the wheel of time, and how we go through these phases, quite lengthy phases in the thousands and tens of thousands of years, and that there's these ages, and it goes from, you know, the golden to the silver to the bronze, and then the dark age, and then we go back to bronze, silver, and gold. And that when we go through this darkest point, which is where we've been for, hard to really determine because they don't know the exact length of these yugas, but it basically is the most shadow, I want to say, disruptive energy, the most chaotic energy, the most misaligned energy, and then the yuga that follows it. And apparently, according to most of the analysts, we are just at the end of that and about to go through a transition and head upwardly, gradually, very slowly towards more and more light frequency healing. But that this next long phase is going to be about healing the trauma, transmuting therapeutically, healing and coming into right relationship with all that ghost energy of the trauma, because everything happens so rapidly in the Kali Yuga age. I mean, if you just even look at our own 5 generations back, like World War II, World War I, just go back, like, you know, it's just trauma. There's no time to heal, to make reparation in the soul. People, it's just piggybacked on top. So it's like we've got this massive layer cake of hungry ghost energy. And that's what we're going to be unpacking over the next maybe even millennia. So we're going to be doing a lot of healing around this. And I feel like when you're asking about that spiritual psychosis, it's a bit like zombie apocalypse, right? It's like we're at this point where there's so much of that everywhere, that ghost energy, that we have the opportunity, we're being invited to say, let's get really good. Let's get really caring about how to like do the work, like Thomas was saying, you know, go out and work with some of these people that are the most fractured and give as much of your gift without, you know, without sacrificing yourself, right? Like it's just like throwing a lifeline to someone. You're not going to throw yourself at them. You're going to throw your lifeline and they'll either be able to grab a hold and get some support and help, come out of the water a bit, or not.
Yeah, no, that's a good explanation. Kind of like rapid fire trauma at the moment, isn't it? Sort of thing.
Well, it has been. It has been. Yeah.
And like we said before we come on, it seems like there's a lot of chaos in the world, but obviously it depends on people's perception. But if you were to pay attention to it, but there's always been chaos in the world. It's just that we haven't, that there's not, as far as we know, although it could be disputed, I suppose, that we weren't, people weren't aware of it as they are now. But I guess it will fix itself if there is anything to fix.
I think every time, at least in America, that elections come around, everything starts getting crazy, especially now with social media. But I wonder if that energy, regardless of whatever you vote for, that energy starts affecting everyone else. It's like a domino effect's what I'm saying. So that energy of like chaos starts infecting everyone. I think it's by design. Because people already are like, a lot of people are like hopeless, and I hear all these things constantly, like hopeless, and I can see it on people too. they're feeling hopeless, they're feeling lost, they don't have answers. But I'm like, there's answers in actually moving. That's the answer. The answer is in actually moving. Like, you're too afraid to move from one place to the next. Why are you afraid? And I think that's the key. And then they'll come up with like 5 excuses as to why. And I'm like, how are those excuses working out for you?
I guess if
Like, are you happier now, or you're not happy?
spent their whole life.
If you're going to spend your whole life like concerned about 5 things, and why don't you just fix those 5 things and or ignore one of them and just do whatever it is you have to do?
A lot of lamenting over things that we have no control over immediately, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, and then meanwhile, ignoring things that we do have control over. And I find it fascinating, Thomas, that you're saying this about where people are afraid to move. And I find, like, when I work with my clients, it's so interesting to recognize the things that keep people stuck. Like, I mean, I move a lot physically. I move around a lot. And so I've become pretty adept at that part of the frequency. It's not always an easy or a good or a recommendable thing, but it's interesting to notice when people are being inspired to move, or when they can feel that there's a need for them to make a choice and move and do something different. The things that prevent them are just mind-blowing to me. Like, people that won't move because, like, you know, they just can't even conceive of, like, oh, if you don't know exactly where you're going to go from house A to house B, buy the next house, that you could maybe like rent a house for a year or something. Like, they couldn't, absolutely no way. That is like not even a consideration. Or they can't move because they have a cat, and that cat is like going to live for another 5 years, so they can't do anything. It's like, wow, it's like, it's just so wild, you know, like that. It's like so much is built around an obstacle that, to me, being someone that moves a lot, is like, well, there's so many solutions to that obstacle. Like, really curious, interesting, perhaps really creative solutions to that obstacle, right? And yet people just go into that, I have to batten down the hatches and not do anything because I'm afraid to move in any direction, right?
Yeah.
And I'll hear people say that things are like, they'll be like, I can't do this, or I don't have enough money. And I'm like, do you understand? Because like it messes with me sometimes. I'm like, do you understand that literally you're manifesting that? Because I have to use like real world application. I'm like, there's 2 people in the ghetto, one stays there. I've been in some very bad areas on my travels. I think I like just to go to them to look at people and watch them. And I'm like, but another person leaves this place and becomes successful. What makes these 2 people different? Was it simply a belief, or someone was like, I'm not willing to put up with this anymore?
Yeah, it's generally when people are at their wits' end that it forces them to have to do something, and I guess at the end of the day, I feel like it comes down to, and I heard this a few years ago, and it's about priorities. It's kind of and it's when, if someone says, if I was to say I'm too busy to do A, and because I want to do B, that's not because I'm too busy. It's just I prioritize B over A. So it's just all about priorities. It's not being too busy to do something, because if you really wanted to do something, you'd make the time to do it. And we generally do make the time for things that we really want to do, and we just make the excuse that I'm busy because we don't want to tell someone that, oh, actually, I'd rather do that than spend time with you or whatever. Because that's, you know, that's quite blunt, and I suppose it's not necessarily the nicest thing to say, but it's the truth. But then again, it's, you know, you can't handle the truth sometimes. So,
well, you're interestingly bringing up something that I find curious, which is that people often will prioritize crises, right? And I think of a friend of mine who's in her late 60s and her kids live, like a day or two drive from where she lives, and they have kids of their own and stuff. And she's like, I've tried to get them to come home and just come home for like a week in the summer, bring the kids, do this, do that, whatever. Let's get together at Christmas. And she's like, they're too busy. And then she's like, but if I got sick and was in hospital, or if I died, they'd come.
Yeah.
But why is it like it's less important that I'm here and ready to receive them and want to like enjoy time with them? That's less of a priority than if I'm dead or sick.
Yeah.
Right? Dead or dying, then that's a priority.
It wouldn't make any sense, does it? Yeah, I know.
Yeah. So it's I agree with you. It is about like we're almost prioritizing crisis management.
And that's fine. I mean, we all have priorities. We can't do everything all at once, all at the same time, even though we may be doing it in another form, in another world, or what have you. But we can only do, I guess, one thing at once, so to speak. But and so we're going to have priorities and do things that we prefer to do, but it's we can. Sometimes it doesn't make sense. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
It seems weird.
Well, and it's interesting. Thomas just said, you just said that about the two people in the ghetto and who leaves and who stays. And it's almost like the one that prioritizes suffering, right? Stays. And the one that prioritizes adventure, exploration, stepping outside of their comfort zone is the one that goes, right? And it's like, and I think it comes down to prioritizing crisis and suffering versus
it's almost like our willingness to change is proportionate to our willingness to suffer. Because if we're resistant to change, then we generally suffer because we be comfortable or what have you. If we're open to change, then we're able to move and flow a lot easier because things change. We don't live the same way our whole life, and everything changes. And so I guess, there may be a correlation between suffering and change, I guess. I don't know. Maybe. I hadn't thought of that before.
I think it's just important for people to self-identify what the problem is and then how to fix it. I see too many people running from the problem. So it's like, if this is the issue, how do you deal with it? How do you fix it? How do you, I don't know, maybe it's a more masculine thing, but with me, it's like if there's a door and it needs to be kicked open, and I haven't been this way too much lately, they're saying, but I still do it. But like, if I see the door, I'm like, let me just kick the door open and see what happens. Like, I don't know what's on the other side of this door, but why not just see what happens?
Losing the fear. Hey, Andrew. Tony's got a question. Hey, Tony, brother. Says, what is physical or spiritual entities? I think this was earlier when we were talking about the hungry ghosts. But what's both of yours sort of take on physical or spiritual entities?
There's a lot of different spiritual entities out there. You see, this is a problem when you get into negative stuff. People get scared. But like with myself, when I was 37, I was almost possessed. Probably one of the reasons why I do a lot of get rid of a lot of stuff. And I asked God for help, and God gave me somebody to help me, and then someone else came in and helped me too after that was over with. But what I'm getting at is that there's so many frequencies of beings. And I think some people think the higher, this is fun, I find hilarious,
Yeah.
that the higher the frequency, there's no negative beings up there.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's like people are like, whatever tried to come after me at that time in my life. I mean, I'm 46, but I was like 37. It was like a ninth dimensional like entity that was negative. And I was like, oh, okay. I mean, I didn't know what to do with it, but that was part of that dark night of the soul concept that I was going through at that time. And I had seen it previously, and a former fiance I had that happened to her as well. So I think that like these things are brought up to certain people at certain times because of certain things they have to do.
Yes.
But I see other people run away from it. I have a friend of mine, and he's very good at like, but it scares him. Like, people's eyes turn black, they fall over, all kinds of stuff when he's working on them. Like certain people that have these issues, but it scares them. But with me, I'm just like, they can't touch me. So why would I be afraid of them? But yeah, there's good spirit. There's plenty of good spiritual entities. There's neutral ones. There's negative ones. Depending on how you look at that. I mean, yeah.
I'm curious about the question because I hear a differentiation between physical and spiritual entities. So I guess it's embodied entities or disembodied. Is that the question? I'm wanting to get a little more clarity on the question, because like, I agree that there's a whole variety, like Thomas said, there's a whole variety of different entities at the different dimensional levels, and higher does not mean better. In a way, it means more disassociated from the realm of the physical. So you could say that much higher dimensional entities have less empathy, less emotional connection, because a lot of what I determine as emotion is basically the energy when spirit moves into matter and back out. So it's, to me, it's the dimensional going into matter and out of matter that creates emotion. And so the further away from matter you are, the less emotion is available to an entity. And therefore, what I see as negative entities are entities that are in the chaos principle, which means they haven't come into harmony. They are in disorganization. So if you think of it almost like the guides are showing me, like, on Star Trek, when you come apart and all the little particles are like, and you're not like, and then you come back into form and you're back into some sort of a form, whether it's physical or in another dimensional form. It's that the energy of evil or dark energy, dark force energy, is basically the chaos principle of not having landed in a harmonic frequency yet. So you're out of order. You're disordered.
Right.
And of course, they're trying to find order. They're trying to seek some sort of embodiment that brings order to that chaos principle. Does that make sense? So discarnate entities could be in any dimension, and they could radiate at a frequency of order in the 7th, 8th, 9th dimension, beautiful, bright, light entities. Or they could be going through some kind of distortion frequency and haven't found their next harmonic alignment. So as they're in that distortion, that is what we see as negative entities, because they're seeking something. They need something. To either downgrade into form, matter, 3D, 2D, 1D, or upgrade into some other dimension. Does that resonate for you, Thomas?
Yeah. I mean, there's a Judeo-Christian perspective too, which I go to on some things.
Mhm.
So I've been into hell and stuff. I've gone to like other planets. But at the same time, I don't know if it's like made by, I don't know if humans have made hell. I mean, I don't know quite what to think of it.
Mm.
Because when I went down there, like, yeah, there were some things that tried to stop me, but I just laughed at them and walked by them or around them. But I just think there's so many different ways of looking at it. So I think an archon or a negative entity, if you got galactic, archon, draconian, any of that stuff, is more just chaotic by nature.
Mhm.
But I know there's a lot of entity or things on this planet that could be considered dark
Mhm.
that don't want to be here anymore, and they're looking for someone to cross them over.
Good point. They're exactly what I was just saying. They're looking for their next like alignment place.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So in a way, it's almost like, and I like, because I work with the tarot and number 15, the devil in the tarot, I also associate the age of 15 in our Western civilization maturing process, right?
Yeah.
And so that 15 is that chaos principle. It's that energy of the transmuter, right? It's the thing that's going to like push us up against all the temptation, all the disorientation, all the disorganization, you know, on all the bodies, right?
Mm.
And so when you think about your average 15-year-old in our Western civilization, that is their existential crisis. They're going through total disorder within. And so what you want is to not shame them, for one, and secondly, not to scare them any further into disorder. You want to acknowledge they're experiencing disorder and then support them in finding some grounding place to come into harmony. Because the 15 of the tarot, the 15, number 15 of the devil is the 1 and 5. When you add the 1 and the 5 together, you get the 6, which is harmony.
All right.
So you're almost there. Like they certainly don't need to be like battered around and shamed and humiliated or like repressed and caged up, right? It's like a little bit of therapeutic support for a 15-year-old can help them find their harmonic naturally. So to me, it's all about don't get attached to the narrative of whatever it is. At 15, the world's against me. Everybody's this, da 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 da. You know, it's like that can all be true from your current chaotic perspective, but it is not necessarily a permanent place to land.
That feels like it, I suppose.
Was that saying? I don't know who it was that said it, but if you're going through hell, keep going.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Keep going. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. A reminder when you were speaking about just because something's got a higher frequency per se doesn't necessarily automatically mean is sort of light or love and light or all that stuff. It reminded me of one of the first sort of books that I read, spiritual books, was The Law of One, the Ra channeling, and in it, if it's to be believed, they explain how there are two sides, if you like, of a circle, say, going upwards from the bottom sort of up to the top, and it's just which path you take, whether you take the path of service to self or whether you take the path of service to others. And you can have the same frequency both sides, just to which side you want to sort of choose. And it's something like if your actions are over 50% of service to others, then you go up the service to other side. But to go up the service to self side, you have to be something like 90 or 95% service to self in order to go up that side. I found that interesting. I mean, I that's just what I read, and that's just what was channeled. I don't know how true it is, but I just found it interesting how the service to self side had a higher percentage in order to sort of climb the ladder, so to speak, than the service to others. And I found that quite fascinating. It was one of the first things I read, so I was kind of thought, and in effect, service to others is also service to self as well. So, you know, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's a mixture of duality. I just think it's a mixture of duality. We don't look at like the Eastern civilizations and like how they work, especially in metaphysics. Everything's got to be black and white. And that even in Christianity or Judaism or anything, it's all black and white. And but in the Eastern places, they're like, and I know a lot of them feel like suffering brings enlightenment, like Buddhism, like certain sects of Buddhism. But at the same time, I'm like, well, there's no what. And some people look at that the masculine as the feminine, the masculine and the feminine, and then the light and the dark. But everyone wants to say light and dark. And that's where I get like irritated, because I'm like, everything isn't just light and dark. There's shades of gray.
50 of them.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's, I mean, I can do more with a set. There's a certain set of beings I work with called Ashante. They're like a universal. There's some kind of consciousness, but they're neutral beings. So like sometimes if I'm doing like a house clearing or something and I send them in, they can do things that sometimes a light being can't do, but we have an understanding with each other. So they can come in and just wipe the place clean, you know, like whatever. But maybe a light being and I work with lots of light beings, but at the same time, it's like, sometimes it's faster for them to do it. Maybe it's just because of their skill set I'm hearing. Because they seem to be more warrior-like than anything. But, yeah.
No nonsense.
So come in with like, swords and everything and start hacking things away.
Well, there's definitely a time for a warrior approach, right? It's like, you know, I think that really speaks to, Thomas, what you were saying earlier about taking action when the call comes. Like, it's interesting because I just pulled out 3 tarot cards. If you're open to me showing you.
Cool.
Because like this whole light and dark thing is obviously a huge theme in the tarot. In fact, the death card is another one. But I always think about, we start off with the High Priestess, right? It's like the balancing between the yin yang, light, Boaz and Jachin, the pillars of the Temple of Jerusalem.
Oh, I was just about to ask what the B and the J stood for.
Yeah, and it's about the passivity and then the action. So it's exactly what we're talking about: passivity, you know, and then the action, warrior style approach, right? And the High Priestess is just kind of like basically caretaking the gate, so that there's always going to be the opportunity to come in and experience duality, just for the sake of experiencing the polarization of black and white, right? So what you're talking about, Thomas, like, it's not just dark and light. There's all these shades of gray in the middle, but the and if you know about black contains all the colors. So it's actually, is it gray or is it rainbows in between? Like, it's hard to say. Gray rainbows, gray clouds with a lot of rainbows inside of them. Anyway, it's important for distinction, for the purpose of analysis and self-awareness, to have the experience of duality, for contemplating that, experiencing it. But to live in duality it's very hard because it's literally like you're being polarized all the time, maybe pulled apart or disrupted a lot. There's two characters in the tarot that balance the polarization of duality pretty differently. So we have the Hierophant, where guess what? Those pillars that he's between are now gray. They're gray pillars. So he is in the business of basically sharing dogma and doctrine that neutralizes the chaos of polarity. So church, organized religion is a great example of this. Here, we'll sort it out for you. You don't have to struggle with duality and polarity. We'll tell you the rules, how you live in balance, and we'll solve the dilemma of duality for you. So that's, and you could almost say service to others, like, here, let me help you do that. Let me help you solve the dilemma of duality. I'll show you the way. You don't have to figure anything out for yourself. I'll do it for you, but you got to follow. The side of obedience. He's holding up his hands in the mudra for obedience. Yeah.
Oh, right.
You got to follow more or less without asking questions, because too many questions would create too much polarity and too much chaos. So he's just saying, chill and let me show you the path. Then there's the other gray wizard, the Hermit. He's also internalizing the dilemma, the battle of duality. He's doing it on a very, very internal, personal level. So this guy is doing it on the outside, helping others, and this guy is doing it on the inside. He's a spiritual adept, a yogi. He's up in the mountains meditating and traveling alone. He's aesthetic, he's like this monk, hermit. So we've got, there we go, that duality and two ways. But both of them, you'll notice the yellow light, right? In the Hierophant, it's in his crown, so he's been given authority to give the doctrine. In the other one, in the Hermit, it's in his lantern. So he's not going to guide you and tell you what to do, but you can follow him on his mountain path, follow his light. You can follow his way of becoming enlightened. And learn by example.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I like that. I haven't heard it put like that before, because I'm not that familiar with the tarot. So, but that was brilliantly explained. Thank you. And it makes total sense.
Yeah.
So, and I guess the Hermit. What was I going to say? It's almost like that's what I was going to say. You if you do it the way of the Hermit, is it a question of know thyself, and you get to know yourself a lot more than by trying to sort of influence others, because you're not necessarily. But with the Hierophant, you're trying to influence how other people
or you're studying others, the scriptures. You're studying the teachings of others to learn that way. Whereas the Hermit is going to just go into the remote places and literally meditate, and like this is almost of the world, and this is internal. So the external world and the internal world.
Yeah. And I think that's what people avoid the most, is the internal. It's something that's come through a lot for me lately. It's just the internal. I see some people that they literally can't be, they have to be around other people 24/7, or they have to have this, or they have to have that. And I think the spiritual path can be kind of a lonely journey. I mean, you meet people along the way. There's people you're friends with for a long time. But I feel like there's a lot of loneliness to it because people will, like people, not a lot of people won't, but a lot of people will be coming to you all the time asking questions. Like you're not always sure about every single person. Like some people you are, but you get where I'm going. It's like a lonelier path.
It is a lonelier path.
But you have to be willing to go inside.
Yeah. Be comfortable in your own company, so to speak, and with your own thoughts. But yeah, that was fascinating. Thank you, Charlotte. Any other questions, Thomas?
No, I'm good. We can wrap up. We have 1:14.
Yeah.
Do you want to just remind us where we can find you, Charlotte, and if you got anything coming up?
Yeah, thank you. Of course, my website below, ioftheworld.ca, you can book sessions. I am not doing my personal bookings through that platform anymore. I am now working with a platform called Beyond Mystic. It's a pretty large international platform. There's a link on my website. If you go to book a reading, book a session, you can see I have 2 other readers working on my site now. My daughter is one of them, and my dear friend Anita Peterson is another one.
Nice.
So you can check out readings there, and then also my YouTube channel, which is just my name, Ashella Yardley, and follow me on YouTube. I do live Q&As every week, and yeah.
Excellent. And Thomas, what you got coming up this weekend? You got another course?
I have a class on channeling on Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern on my website, thomassawyer.com. It's just a 2-hour live class. I'm just going to teach people the basics of channeling. That's what I've been doing a lot lately, is been doing channeling and energy work. So, yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you, Ashala, for joining us again. It was a pleasure.
My pleasure, guys. So awesome.
Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next week. Take care.
Blessings. Bye for now.
Au revoir.